Welcome back. In the previous step, we started creating the execute authentication service method. In this step, let's try and connect this execute authentication service method to the login page. Where are we calling that? Calling it in the login page, login.component.ts. Right, this is where we are calling the hard-coded service.authenticate method. What we want to do eventually is we would want to use the basic authentication service dot execute authentication service. Now, if you'd see that right now it's a synchronous call, right? This is actually a synchronous call in the sense that you call this method and it either returns a true or false. But what would happen in the case of a service call? Right? In the case of service calls, we would use observables. This will be an asynchronous call. So what we would need to do in the case of calling this service is we would need to define the methods to handle both the success and the failure. So let's start with it right now. So what I'll do is I'll create a parallel method. So I'll create a method called handle basic auth login. I don't really want to change the methods which are already there. What we'll do is we'll change the connection to use handle basic auth login at a later point in time. For now, what we want to do is we would want to start using the basic authentication service. Now, how can I start using the basic authentication service? I need to first inject it into the constructor. Let's get started with that. So I would want to create an instance of that. So let's copy this stuff out, private. This will not be a hard-coded authentication service. This will be a basic authentication service. And it's giving a compilation error, control space, import it in. So let's use the basic authentication service in here too. And now, instead of the authenticate, what do we want to do? We would want to use the other method which is present in here, execute authentication service. That's the one which we would want to use. So execute authentication service. Now, we don't really want to use the return value of this. This would return a observable back, right? What we want to do is we would want to subscribe to it. An observable executes only when we say subscribe. Inside the subscribe, you can define the success scenario and the unsuccessful scenario. What is the successful scenario for us? When the data comes back properly. So when data comes back properly, what we want to do? Let's first log the data, console.log data. That's the first step. After that, what we'll do is we'll route to the welcome page. The next thing is an error. If an error comes back, what do we want to do? What we want to do is just set the flag invalid login is equal to false. And you might also want to do console.log error. Let's remove these lines of code which are present in here, and you'd see that everything compiles. This is cool, right? Now what we are doing in here is exactly the same as what we replaced. So in the handle login, we were exactly doing the same thing. If this was written true back, then it means valid user, we would navigate to the welcome page. Otherwise, invalid login. Over here, we are saying if we are getting data back from this service, okay, valid call. Otherwise, invalid call, invalid login. That's cool. But did we do everything that the old service was doing in this specific method? What we are doing in here is if the user ID is valid, we are setting it into this session. We are setting authenticated user into this session. Are we doing it in this specific approach? Nope, we are not really doing that right now. Now, how do I define over here in the executed service that if this service succeeds, then do a specific thing? The way I can do that is by doing something called dot pipe. What we are adding in is more declaration. We are saying if this thing is successful, then do this thing as well. In the pipe, we can define if there is a proper response coming back, then map it. When we get the data back successfully, what do we want to do? What we want to do is we would want to set this. What we want to do is we would want to set something into the session storage, this specific thing. So session storage dot set item authenticated user comma username. One of the important things about doing stuff when you are working on the observable. So over here, we are still working on the definition of the observable. This observable is executed only when somebody subscribes to it. What we want to make sure is whoever subscribes to it, they would want to see the data. That's the reason why what you need to do is in each of these methods, you need to return that data back. So what we are doing is, if there is a valid response, then set something into session and return the response back so that whoever is subscribing to it will get the data. Now let's import the map function. So it's in a import map from rxjs/operators and semicolon. Cool. Now the code compiles. Now everybody is happy. So we have the basic authentication stuff almost ready. There is a lot of coding that we have done. I would recommend you to check the code once before we would start executing it. So what are we doing in the execution authentication service? Passing the username and password, creating the basic auth string, executing it. And what we are doing is, if it's successful, we are using a pipe method. The pipe method allows us to declare what should be done if the request succeeds or if the request fails. So we are declaring that if the request succeeds, then set something into session storage. And we are returning the data back so that this is available to whoever is making use of this service. Where are we making use of this service? This is where we are making use of this service. So we are calling the execute authentication service.subscribe. If this service call is successful, well, route to welcome. Otherwise, log the error. The thing is, we have not really connected this to the welcome page. Let's do that in the next step. Until then, bye-bye.